The Volkstrum were Germany's last-ditch attempt to raise large numbers of troops to hold back the overwhelming of Germany by the Western Allies and Russians to the east. The original idea for a People's Army was actually in the 17th century, in 1813 to 1815, as Landstrom units had been formed to help fight off Napoleon, and the idea had stayed within the German people as an option of last resort, and the Volkstrum had existed on paper since 1925, so on the 18th of October 1944 Hitler ordered the formation of these units, and mandatory recruitment began on the 27th, with some seeing combat as early as November 10th. The initial goal was to recruit 6 million men to hold back the Allied forces, but these numbers were never reached. Estimation of total strength varies from 1 million to 2.5 million, but what we do know is that only around 1 million were actually armed and equipped, even though to a very poor standard. Casualties of Volkstrum units was very high due to a combination of poor training, lack of equipment, and the fact some units were very brave and fought to the death, which meant casualties ranged from 125,000 to 650,000 by the end of the war. The German High Command attempted during recruitment to make the Volkstrum seen as a mass populist breakout of patriotism and fanaticism for support of the Reich and belief in that the war could still be won. In reality, it was a last-ditch attempt for Germany to hold off the enemy. Organisation and recruitment of these units fell to the Nazi Party, not the German army, as after attempts on Adolf Hitler's life and various failed coups, Nazi High Command wanted to force loyalty to them in case other internal conflicts arose, and local Nazi leaders were put in charge of local populations to keep a tight hold over them, but when combat began, units would fall under an army command. As recruitment began, all men aged 16 to 60 and even some as young as 14 and as old as 70 were to serve in Volkstrum units, with the ideal number being 642 men per battalion, which varied greatly. The recruits fell into one of 4 classes, these being Class 4, men with limited physical ability, whose role was security duties and light duties, mainly non-combat. Class 3 were men ages 16 to 20 who were actually sent for more training and to be used to reinforce professional army units. Class 2 were men who had important jobs, so they were able to be kept in local districts as they needed to work when not in combat, and Class 1 who were to be trained and sent where needed most, which mainly meant the front lines. Also, many members of the Hitler Youth were put straight into Volkstrum units. Training for these men was very poor, with many having less than a week's training, and mainly ex-military and World War veterans called up to do the training. Even the basics like firing a weapon was not usually done, as lack of ammo meant every round had to be prioritised for combat. Fortunately for Germany, they had mandatory military service for decades prior, which meant many older men had military training, which was a small saving grace. After their extremely basic training, all men had to take an oath to Hitler and the Reich to ensure absolute loyalty among the Volkstrum. The equipping of the Volkstrum was even worse than their training. For starters, weaponry was in short supply and every weapon that could be scavenged had to be used. The variation of weapons was massive, with everything from Carabiner 98Ks to older Gewehr 98s and 19th century Gewehr 71s, as well as Drzev M1907 pistols, also captured Soviet, Belgian, French and Italian weapons that had been captured by the German forces during the war. Volkstrum weapons like the MP3008 machine pistols, Volksgewehr 1-5 rifles, and VMG-27 light machine guns were also used. In the last few months of the war, weapons became so short that even shotguns, muskets and crossbows found in museums were used to fight off the enemy. The uniforms for the Volkstrum were basically non-existent, as just like weapons there was a huge shortage, and any military uniforms that could be found, also postal, rail worker and prison guard uniforms, were used, as many members of the Volkstrum were using homemade civilian clothing. The only universal piece of clothing was the black armband with the Volkstrum insignia on it to identify them, as it was important for them to wear these, as Germany had been executing non-uniform partisans throughout the war, and they didn't want their men to face the same outcome if they were captured. When the first Volkstrum units were seen by regular army soldiers, many cruel jokes became commonly said about them, such as, "Why is the Volkstrum Germany's most precious resource?" which was answered by, "Because its members have silver in their hair, gold in their mouths, and lead in their limbs." They were also nicknamed the casseroles, as the young men were seen as the meat of the dish, whereas the old and meek were seen as the vegetables and the gravy. Harsh but fair, given the circumstances. The Volkstrum saw combat in many places from Berlin to Königsberg, and the performance in combat was very mixed due to the huge deviation in weapons and training. Also, that something that was impactful on their combat performance was whether they were supported by regular army forces and supporting weapons. Some units performed rather well, especially when working in coordination with professional military forces. An impressive performance of the Volkstrum was when they were attached to Army Group A and Centre that were being pressed hard by the Soviet Spring Offensive in early 1945. These units helped defend 3 million German refugees from Soviet attacks and helped hold off the offensive and sapped the momentum from the Soviet attacks. And on the defensive, Volkstrum units performed well, as holding ground and shooting is far easier than launching attacks in coordination. Many Volkstrum units were absolutely decimated in battle by better armed and well supplied enemy forces, with units suffering regular attrition rates of 60 to 100% casualties. Extremely high attrition rates and very brutal. As the Reich's final stand began in Berlin, 60,000 Volkstrum served, many fighting to the death, in many cases actually holding back the Soviet advance and even stopping it. But when this happened, the Soviets would level entire streets, and in the end it only delayed the inevitable, with over 40,000 Volkstrum falling in battle alone. In the end, the Volkstrum were unsuccessful, and many historians argue that the millions committed to these roles would have been better served in logistics roles and doing labour, and a focus on young men who were fit, being armed and trained, who would then reinforce professional units, would have served Germany far better. The bravery was admirable, and in my opinion this makes them true warriors of war. Hope you've enjoyed the video and learned a few things along the way. If you did, please like, subscribe and leave a comment. Thanks for watching everyone, and have a fantastic day.